where do you think this level of anger is coming from? Because it appears to me that that's what's new. Like, these political divides have always existed. These political divides between right and left, or political divides between people who are more interested in collective solutions versus individual solutions. Why do you think people are so pissed all the time? I mean, they're just, you can feel it in the air. Like the eagerness to stomp on somebody's face is really strong. That's why when the Roseanne thing happens, it can't just be like what you're saying, where, okay, she's a mentally ill person, maybe you have to take the show off the air, maybe that's the proper response, but she might actually have a problem here.
She certainly does. What I think it's coming from is toxic tribalism. That's what I think. I think people, they're on a team, they want their team to win, and they want their team to win by any means necessary, and they feel disenfranchised because we have a president, Donald Trump. I mean, he is who he is, and he stands for a lot of things that they find abhorrent. And you have a lot of people now that are calling themselves Antifa, and they're literally by their own actions acting in a fascist manner, and they're calling themselves anti-fascists, and they're putting bandanas on their face, they're hitting people with bike locks, and they're engaged in violence. And the left is using violence as a means to solve these differences that we have in ideas and opinions. They're shutting people down, like Christina Hoff Sommers, just yelling out at her, a woman who's her whole life has been a feminist, her whole life, and she calls herself a factual feminist because she wants women who are empowered and who are intelligent to be held accountable for the actual facts behind what they're saying, and to discuss this, to empower people with reality. And by doing that, she's become an enemy. I mean, it's very strange to watch her get shouted down by other feminists that think that she's the wrong kind of feminist. I mean, it's really bizarre. But the anger and the vitriol and the violence that's attached to it is something that's completely new and was always associated with right-wing thuggish mobs. It was always associated with hate groups like the KKK or something along those lines, neo-Nazis. But you're seeing this level of violence from the left now, these weird, like, university professors and these dorky people that are saying, burn this motherfucker down, and people are cheering in the streets, and white people are the problem, and there's so many people that are tenured professors that are getting away with saying like ridiculous, crazy shit and calling out for violence, and it's completely irresponsible, and it's foolish.
It feels weird too because back in the 1960s, at least there was something to fight over. Right?
Yes.
At least back in the 1960s, if you were gay, you said, okay, I don't have my rights. There's something to fight over. Or you're black and you say, I don't have my rights. True. There's something to fight over. Or you're female and you say, well, feminism hasn't done what it needs to do yet. There's something to fight for. But right now, the country's pretty good. Like things are pretty good for the vast majority of people in this country. Put aside the economics for a second, because people always fail a rise in economics. It just happens. But and some of that is natural and some of that is stuff that's fixable. But one thing that is certainly true is that the notion of a governmental invasion of rights against any of these groups, this is not something that is commonly happening. It's not that the government is cracking down on black people or Hispanic people or at this point even gay people. And yet there's this level of anger that feels like riots in the 1960s. We're talking about sort of the levels of chaos. And I have a theory. So I'll lay it out for you. So my theory, and I don't know where you stand religiously. Are you agnostic, atheist, religious?
More agnostic than anything. I grew up Catholic and I abandoned it when I was a young boy. I went to Catholic school and that cured me.
So here's my theory. My theory is that everybody has broken down into tribalism because it used to be that we were a larger tribe, meaning that the way that you defeat local tribalism is by creating a larger tribe that everybody feels a kinship to and a membership to. So in the United States, you had people who've had tribal kinship to state governments, and then after the Civil War, that basically went away because the federal government stepped in and stopped slavery through war making power, and then people felt a general kinship to the federal government. You were American now. It wasn't that you were Californian or you were Texan. You were now American. And the same thing goes back to biblical times where you have all of these various tribes. You have the tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of and the tribe of Ephraim, but they're the Jews, right? There's a bigger tribe that eats them. And it used to be that the tribe for America was called America, right? And that tribe was bonded by a certain set of creedal values of individual rights, values of personal virtue, that these things had to be combined. You had to be a good person to your neighbors, but at the same time, the government had no right to come in and take your stuff and force you to be a nicer person. So the idea was that you voluntarily were going to be a nicer person to your neighbors because you thought that was the right thing to do, but it wasn't the government's job to come in and force you to be nicer to your neighbors because that would be fascistic and overbearing and tyrannical. And that's gone away because people don't feel like they have to be nice to their neighbors. And I think part of that has to be connected with lack of communal institutions. That, I'm not saying everybody has to go to church, but people who are in churches tend to get along better with each other in the church than people who are outside the church and people inside the church. Doesn't mean that you got to pick a church, but it does mean that we have to have some sort of communal institutions. And right now we are savagely tearing apart each of our communal institutions up to and including things like the NFL, where suddenly things where we would bond over that, like Super Bowl Sunday was a bonding time for the country. And now we can't even bond over that. We can't bond over anything right now because all of these creedal values have been dissipated by our own personal malevolence toward each other.
I think that's a great point. I think it's a great point, too, about the benefit of religion is that you do have these ideas and values that are shared amongst this community and group. And when you are an atheist or an agnostic, you don't really have that group other than like what you're getting from a lot of atheists. You get this really hardcore progressive ideology that is in many ways like a religion. And I think there's probably some real merit to what you're saying.
Yeah, Robert Putnam makes this point in his book Bowling Alone. He talks about this new fascination with diversity, and the diversity is our strength, and this whole line. And he was a big believer in this. Robert Putnam, this professor of sociology, is a big lefty, and he says that diversity was our strength was his guiding kind of notion. And then he did the research into it. What he found is that as diversity of a census tract increases, the only thing that he found that increase are protest marches and TV watching. That's the only thing that actually increases in a particular area based on ethnic diversity. He said the only area where he could see that ethnic diversity actually made things better was in the context of a broader group. So in the army, for example, then ethnic diversity is great because then you get a bunch of people who are fighting for the same purpose, and the guy next to you is your brother. Doesn't matter if he's black or white. And you see this with people who you talk to who are in the military all the time. When they talk about people of different races in the military, this is usually the way they talk about people of different races in the military, which is very different than the way people talk about race in the United States more broadly said. You also see this in churches, but communal institutions have declined so markedly that the only way I think that we're going to be able to have a system where we can all live with each other is to reestablish some form of communal talking with each other, even if it's just forums like this one, where we're talking with each other. And if we did this live, we'd get thousands of people to show up just to hear us talk to each other.
Yeah.
Even those sort of communal institutions need to exist. Otherwise, we're going to completely polarize. I think it's one of the dangers of the internet. I love the internet. I've made my living on the internet. You make your living on the internet. But one of the dangers of the internet is that it's all personal to you. You don't actually have to go out and be with other human beings. You get to hide behind the screen and tweet nasty things at each other.
Yeah, you also can find this group of like-minded people and you share an echo chamber. That's another real issue for confirmation bias. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I think that we do need community, and I think the more people like you and like Sam Harris and Eric and Brett Weinstein, people who are open-minded, people who are willing to discuss things politely with people and not shove their ideology down other people's throats, the more we exchange information with each other, the more this idea of being able to communicate like this becomes popular. And I think there's real benefit in that. And I think there's real benefit in these kind of podcast-style discussions because of that. Because you can sit down with a person that maybe doesn't share the same opinions with you, and you can talk things out and maybe disagree, maybe argue, but be polite to each other and realize that a lot of these ideas that we have, we have these predetermined notions of the way we think things should be. And if you don't fit with my predetermined notions, then there must be something wrong with you. It's never just examining these notions and finding out where are these ideas coming from and why am I so married to them? And what is the solution to make everybody comfortable? Is there a solution? Can we stop demonizing people that disagree with us?